Hi, everyone, and welcome back to day 4 of our sprint, where we are having conversations with global leaders on the topic of the crisis is the curriculum. And it has been a fabulous series of conversations so far. We had a leader from the healthcare sector who spoke to us about the interdependencies of leading through this crisis. We've had a best-selling author who spoke to us how we need to break out of learned helplessness and how we can think of our situation right now in terms of one planet, one tribe, one future. We had a speaker who had been a former Army US Black Hawk helicopter pilot yesterday, and she shared with us her strategies for navigating a crisis. We also had a lot of fun because we had invited a journalist and an entrepreneur who have kept their passion alive as a way of reminding us all that as we walk through this crisis, we need to remember that we are not just our jobs, we are so much more than that. And I'm going to invite you to share your thoughts, comments, or feedback on LinkedIn as well as YouTube, where we are streaming right now. So you know how the drill goes. If you can see me and hear me, say hi. Let us know where you are tuning in from so that we know that all systems are a check. And I thought that just before we invite today's guest, some of you missed the fun that we had yesterday. So I'm going to try and share my screen and see if I can share with you just a little snippet of what happened yesterday because it was just so much fun. So bear with me as I try and get this right. And let's see. Yeah. So we had Mitali and Ankur who had come in. Hi, Jyoti. Thank you for saying hi so that we know systems are going. And they played for us this little song. They actually played two songs because we were talking about inspiration and motivation in the age of disruption. So let me see if I can share that clip with you. If you can see the clip, then let me know in the comments that you can. Yeah. I was hoping you could do that for us because I think the energy is what we need right now. We need more music, we need more humanity, we need more art, even in our organizations to kind of carry us through. And, Tushar is saying that was just amazing. Ruben is saying, keep me coming. I so look forward to listening. That was such an upbeat and funny song. So, do you think I could put rank on you by that's right.
We give it a shot. We might need some goof ups, but we're going to give it a shot.
All right. Good, guys. Okay.
Yeah.
Super cute that you're a really guy. I ought to click you so you can fly. I'm loving it's a bright shade. And I know that you're the one to blame. Hey, hey, set me free. Super cute, stop picking on me.
I can't do my homework and I can't think straight. I meet her every morning about 8:30. I'm acting like a lovesick fool. She even got me carrying her books to school. Hey, hey, set me free. Stupid, you've been stopping on me.
Now, I know you probably want us to keep carrying on with that, but we do have an agenda. I wanted to share that with you because we do have all the recordings available on YouTube, including today's session. So if you wanted to catch up with the previous episodes, you're most welcome to. So let me introduce the guest we have for today. Earlier today, I was having this conversation with somebody that we have been talking so much about leadership in crisis. And this whole entire series is about, the crisis is the curriculum. But we want to make sure that we are talking to people who have actually led in the trenches, the ones who understand what the process of transformation is really all about. Otherwise, it's kind of like, a plane is going down there's been a problem with the system and the pilot has fainted or something, and the announcement is made, who can help us fly the plane? And somebody shows up and says, hey, I watched Top Gun and I know something about the inverted G, so maybe I can fly. Well, that's not how it works. The way it works is that we really need to be tuning into the advice of people who have undertaken the transformation with their organizations, who are at the forefront of the change that we are experiencing, and who have personally also been looking and reflecting over the years on how crisis and transformation impacts them and their leadership style. So it gives me great pleasure and honor to welcome today to our show Rahul Welde. Hi, Rahul.
Hi,
Welcome.
Tanvi. Hello, hi. Thanks for having me.
So, for those of you who don't know, Rahul is the EVP of Digital Transformation at Unilever, and he has been doing this work for a really long time. And I am so convinced that this is going to be such an amazing conversation that I got myself like a mug of coffee, Rahul, because you are such an amazing storyteller. I've been following your work for a while, and your blogs are so interesting, and they share so much. So I'm really excited that you could join us today.
I don't write enough. I wish I was writing enough and or doing more of that stuff. But thanks very much for that, and hopefully that's talk about managing expectations.
I believe me, you will exceed them. I'm pretty certain of that. We choose our guests very carefully. So you have had a long career with Unilever. Now you're managing, digital transformation for them globally. You have also had a lot of experience to media and the various facets of it. This is not your first rodeo. You have been in many different crisis situations and leadership roles before. I mean, talk about SARS, talk about the economic meltdown that the world faced, and now we're talking about COVID. So I was hoping that you could reflect a little bit for our viewers as to what, if anything, did you notice was common to leadership in these crisis situations? Because of course you can't compare COVID to the economic meltdown, although some people are saying it might go there. But still, did you notice any red thread about leading people through crisis?
Yeah, I think firstly, this is a crisis. Current crisis is like no other. I don't think certainly in our lifetime we have seen anything like this. But that said, like you rightly pointed out, there have been a few instances where different kind of crises have occurred. I think quite obviously the first principle of leadership when it comes to managing in a crisis is about people and your teams and the people who you work with on a day-to-day basis, and therefore that's an obvious one which is important. But there's another one which gets less talked about when we think of leadership, because you hear everybody talking about how they're taking care of the people, and that's absolutely the right thing to do. And that relates to the extended set of partners. It relates to your suppliers, it relates to your concessionaires, your customers, and a whole lot of different people who are actually working with you in the extended ecosystem. And it's really important to think of them as well, just the way you would think of people, because effectively, I think that's one key principle of leadership, which is, are you looking after everyone? I think when I reflect back, one of the important aspects of this is really how you show up, and how you show up in the context of adversity. Because all of us can be fair weather friends, and we always are. And the question really is that when the weather is not fair, how are you showing up? How are you showing up for the people who actually need you or are looking, to some kind of support? And I think, therefore, we're talking about any kind of crisis. It's really important to stay very balanced and rooted, compassionate and have empathy, but not just towards your immediate people or immediate circle, but even beyond. And I think that overall perspective is very important.
I completely agree. So, given my own work on, leadership in the age of networks, which is another way of looking at the world that we are in right now. Disruption is one perspective, but the structure of it is, it's a networks perspective. And so I think what I'm hearing you say is that, it's about thinking of the entire ecosystem and not just, how your company is surviving. It was interesting because I was talking to, one of the leaders who was saying, we are really focused on how we are going to come on top after the crisis is over. And I kind of thought to myself that that's a rather old economy way of thinking about winning and losing, don't you think? That instead of thinking about how we might all emerge on top, because there are no winners or losers in this whole thing, the way I see it. The interdependence has become so high that, I'm not sure whether that's the correct way to even think about it, if I'm hearing you say it.
Yeah, I think absolutely, but this is not something that is new, right? So even if you go back in history, the idea of communities and, what does we really mean? So the village always stood up for you, right? So, but as societies have progressed, it's fair to say that people became more about the self and less about the we. And it is only in a crisis time that you again see that the we and the entire sense of community manifests itself again in the way we are thinking as individuals, and equally as whether it is companies or like ecosystems, what you talked about. So in many ways, we are going back to the network sort of way of working, which always used to be there, certainly for a very long period of time. And it's only recently that a lot of it became more self-centered.
Yeah, it's helpful to kind of remember that the past is not always to be abandoned, but what pieces of the past can we carry with us into the future. It's not just about setting up new camps, but taking those parts that are most relevant, right? So let me ask you, Unilever, from what it seems to me from the outside, has been very responsive to the communities it's always been a part of, thinking about the planet and sustainability and all of that. But how is it? Because one of the things that I think we need to understand about leadership in crisis is that different sectors are impacted differently, right? And I was hoping you could share, for those of us who are not from like the FMCG space and all of that, is it more difficult in to be leading when you are in that industry? Like what is the situation there? Because, for example, we've heard the aviation industry, we know exactly what's going on over there.
Yeah.
I want to believe, Rahul, that people are eating a lot more noodles and eating and drinking a lot more chips, and that your sector should probably be booming right now. But like, what is the reality of leading in your industry at the moment?
Yeah, I think the FMCG sector or the CPG sector is quite unique in the sense that by and large, it serves the everyday needs of everyday people. And to that extent, your observation that this is a sector which is always in play is absolutely right. Of course, within that, it varies by categories. Some move faster, some move slower. I wouldn't exactly characterize it as boom time, because look, the crisis is very real and it's very large, and therefore it is only a matter of relativity. And because FMCG is about everyday stuff, it has a different edge around it, right? So for sure, in my experience, it has a buzz which is about making sure that you do your stuff every day. It's a simple stuff actually in many ways, but at the same time gets complex. And even when we talk of FMCG, there are multiple dimensions. So if you look at supply chain, if you look at materials, factories, the movement of goods, the sales in the supermarkets, so very broad brush. Each of those components have some impact or the other when a crisis like the current one happens. And therefore, while it's not quite aviation or like what you described, other sectors which have been impacted, definitely even in FMCG, it requires us to be on the edge and to make sure that we are fulfilling whether it is demand or making sure that we're able to produce and supply goods. I think it's not so much about the sector, and I want to pull back to leadership, because those principles apply regardless of the sector you're in, right? So we talked of ecosystems, we talked of extended communities, partnerships. All of these are in play regardless of what sector you're in. And in that sense, I wouldn't distinguish that FMCG has to do something more or less as compared to the others. Of course, there is no doubt that from a pure business perspective, the impact vary, but from a leadership standpoint, I think some of the principles hold good regardless of the sector.
What's striking me as you're sharing about what the reality of the CPG or FMCG sector is, and I think it's important for leaders in the age of disruption to understand realities of different industries. The way we said, it's about the ecosystem. Even if I'm not in that industry, I may be SAP and I might be running the back end of some of the stuff you're doing, but I still need to understand the realities. And it kind of sounds to me that one of the things around leading in this environment is just the diversity of the experiences of people that you're trying to lead. So it's whether it's a country-based difference that we may find in how we have to lead, or in particular some of your like for example, or disinfectants are much in demand right now, and maybe people are not focusing so much on skin cream or something. I'm making this up, but it sounds to me like leadership at this moment requires a lot more dexterity, if I may say that, because you're not leading in one reality, but multiple shifting realities at the same time. Would you say
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, absolutely right. I think, that happens even in the normal course of business for sure, especially for global organizations which are dealing with the diversity, whether it's the cultural nuances, whether it's country, geography, categories. So that applies. All that happens is that in a crisis time like this, it gets exaggerated. And the dexterity that you talk about is really brought to test from two dimensions. One, whether there is clarity of purpose and an overall clarity in the approach, and that is always very helpful. And the second is your ability to navigate in an agile manner through the tough times, because whether it is decision making spans, whether it's the impact of those decisions, each of those are dialed up and exaggerated when there's a crisis. And I think the way to look at disparity is you need that all the time, but definitely you need to tune in much more and be far more assertive in the way you take decisions, left or right, or whichever direction that you choose at the time in the times of crisis.
Yeah. So everything is kind of pushed to its extremities, so to speak, which is why I tell people that, you know, how you lead when times were normal will determine how quickly you're able to move through whatever crisis is coming, because we can't predict what is the crisis that might be coming our way. It's kind of like this, the analogy that I use is of just driving a car. If you are at 100 miles per hour, moving from 100 miles per hour to 500 miles per hour is much easier than if you were at 0 miles per hour and now you're supposed to ramp up to 500. Which is why I think that the organizations that were likely paying attention to actually developing their leaders, like Unilever has a long history of, will probably be able to be much more responsive to their people, to the markets, to the multiple shades that might come in. But the ones who had not been paying attention may find it much more difficult to ramp up now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I call it the state of readiness, right? And therefore, from a leadership standpoint, from an individual standpoint, that state of readiness is very important. Are you drawing down on past experiences, yours as well as those of others? And therefore, are you in a continuous learning mode where you're observing, reflecting? There's no crisis, but even then, you have to keep those cells really alive. And therefore, the better the state of readiness, both through training, through the mindset, and all those aspects, the better you are then to able to respond when it gets tough. And there is no formula for this, but generally speaking, you will see that even to just get ready, be in a state of readiness, is easier said than done, because it requires a certain investment of time in developing, whether it is your own skills, your attitudes towards leadership, and at the same time being extremely observant and self-reflective of everything that's going on.
Yeah.
I wrote in I think it was some time back that I wrote one of the things, comments, which always sticks with me, is that when it comes to mistakes, certainly we always talk about learning from our own mistakes, but we don't talk as much about learning from others' mistakes, because that is really free training. Somebody else has paid the price for that mistake, and all you got to do is observe, reflect, and learn from it. And why would you not do that? It just seems, and all of these, if you just keep putting them into your hopper, you never know at what stage in life you will have to pull out one of those tricks from the hat to either survive or grow, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about, and we have people from South Africa, from India, from many different places tuned in. And so if you have a question or a comment, make sure you leave that in the chat box, and I will take it up with Rahul. So one of the things we've been talking about in corporate circles is, I don't know if you saw that meme or not, Rahul, which said, who runs your digital transformation? Is it IT? Is it CEO? Or is it COVID? because this entire buzz about digital transformation obviously has gone at the back end with priorities shifting and all of that. What has been your experience about the an organization or a leader's ability to respond based on, if I can use your term, readiness of their digital transformation efforts? How did you see that playing in, or are seeing that playing in your own responsiveness to what's happening?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, the fact is that all the digitization is got accelerated during the course of the crisis. And if you were to look forward, beyond doubt, it's going to get accelerated even further, right? So this is a trajectory of growth. In any case, technology and digital has been, disrupting industries, really changing lives, bringing a lot of benefits, by the way, to businesses as well as consumers and society at large. And that trajectory is going to continue. If at all anything, it will accelerate. And therefore, I think there are two jobs to do from a leadership standpoint. One is to see where the momentum is maximum and to see whether you have a right to play or a right to win in that particular area, and then seize that momentum, right? So be on top of it. This again goes back to what I said earlier, which is about a clarity of the thinking and the purpose. What are you really going after? Because digital transformation in particular is used quite generically or loosely. The reality is it can mean so many things. It can mean different things to different people. So the ability to prioritize within that entire landscape is important. And that can come from clarity for sure.
Yeah. So as I told you, I read your blogs and your articles very regularly, and I really liked what you had talked about as the focus being on delivering results, creating capacity, and learning from experience, which I thought was like a neat way of framing when we are thinking about our purpose and North Star. A lot of us would experience this crisis or other crisis at different degrees of proximity. I remember the blog that you had written about when you were caught in the Mumbai terror attacks, when you happened to be in Taj that day. And I thought that some of the learnings that you had shared there from that experience was such a relevant piece then, and even very relevant now, because in some ways, our ability to show up for our people, our ability to show up for our clients, can't be exceeded by our own capacity to think and reflect as we move through crisis situations. So if it's okay with you, I would like to invite you to share with us a little bit about what that experience was like, and how did that shape your perspective of leadership or leading in crisis?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question and point that you make. Because it's crucibles like those or extreme events which take place in your life which help you reframe the entire paradigm of whether it's leadership, your own sense of being, purpose, whatever it might be. And I think when I think about it, for me, it's very clear. It's firstly the most humbling experience that you can ever get. If you want to get grounded, the best way is to face something which is as adverse as being knocked over or death. And that escape from the terrorist attack certainly brought to me this idea of being simply grateful for what we have. We talk about it today. I think you hear everyone talk about the fact that we should be grateful that we can be on a call like this and we are so much better off than so many other people. And that's absolutely true. And it comes to life when you're really faced with extreme adversity. And in my case, it was obviously extremely personal, and it was extreme adversity. I think the second is to draw down from that certain lessons. And I go back to what I talked about, the state of readiness, right? And therefore, the state of readiness to face a crisis in my personal case was exponentially higher, an elevated sense of awareness, if you like, almost like I'm looking at the sixth sense is always active when something is around the corner. And that would not have happened but for that extreme event, perhaps. The third important dimension is that about safety, and that came to life during the course of the terrorist attack. And this is classically, what we tend to, in our cavalier way, as we live our lives on a daily basis, sort of not, I would say necessarily false bravado, but bravado for sure. Believe that, safety is something that we take for granted, but it's really important that we take care of ourselves, that we take care of our families, and for sure put a certain degree of premium on personal safety. personal well-being. And I say that in the context of, like I wrote at that point in time, are you, fit enough to run if you have to run for your life? And it's a practical, physical thing. Can you run for your life, right? Or are you able to sort of be mentally agile and, just sense what's going on and be in the moment to be able to take a decision whether to run or not run? So I think these are all things which are certainly, when I think about it, the sense of well-being and safety enhanced, the value for family and people around me much more enhanced. And at the end of the day, I got away lucky and it was just sort of worked out well. But certainly that was a turning point, and the way I started looking at life changed dramatically from that point on.
Yeah, I remember when I was reading that blog, and this, we normally tend to think of health and fitness in terms of, I hope I don't get sick or my cholesterol is under control. But I think just the way you were describing, was it like how many floors can you run down?
Yeah, how many floors can you run? Can you run a kilometer without, looking back and stopping? I mean, minor things, but trust me, the minor ones are very difficult because a classic one, when you get into an airplane and somebody is giving you advice about safety instructions, you get into a hotel, you tend to dismiss, but no, you got to absorb it in, because I'm saying you will never need it. But when you do, are you ready? Right? And you're ready only if you absorb all these stimulus around you. And it's happening all the time. I mean, we are, of course, discussing an extreme event. It doesn't happen too often and hopefully never happens again. But the lessons from them are very, very relevant.
Yeah, I remember one of the things we had mentioned there was to always, once you check into a hotel, to be looking for the exit signs and where the stairwell is. And I think ever since I read that article of yours, that's the first thing I do when I check into a hotel is like, yes, just exactly where is the exit sign. And
yeah, I think simple. I mean, these are all simple things. I talked about insurance. I talked about keeping your mobile, which is nowadays a lifeline, right? So you can sort of probably do without a glass of water for a few hours, but if the battery goes down, you go crazy in your head. So keep it charged. So all sorts of simple things. Now, obviously, by the way, I think I want to give a bigger message out of this, because these are very operational, simple things. But I think the bigger message around that is about making sure that you are taking care of your own well-being, about being both physically and mentally fit. And anything that happens around you, you're able to react in the moment in a manner which is very thought through. Although it is fast, it is still thought through, because your training and your attitude is all about being in that state of readiness to take on crisis.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So I'm being mindful of the time. I guess my final question to you is, when you look at the landscape around you, do you think people should be doing anything differently than what they are doing right now? Or what is your suggestion on what leaders should be focusing on right now to emerge as the leaders of the post-pandemic world? Because the focus of this entire conversation is, yes, we want to create the post-pandemic world. We can't wait for it. But if we don't learn the lessons we need to learn now, we will never emerge different. And it's not about business as usual. It's about business better than usual. So what's your suggestion, advice, or thought on that?
Yeah, I think we'll all come out of this with a higher degree of resilience than we had before. I think that's a given, because everybody is experiencing something which they've never thought about, they've never seen before. And therefore, even as it happens, I think as a society, there's going to be a greater level of resilience among individuals, among communities, among people. The job of leaders is also to build a higher degree of resilience, so that, again, that the health of whether it's an organization or a community is at a higher level. And building resilience is, again, about making sure that there's really strong support systems. There is strong support within the community, and what I call as very focused interventions, right? So they could be in the nature of interventions which are there for a short period of time or a long period of time. But fundamentally, I think a reset on resilience is something that is inevitable. And more that organizations come out of this stronger will be the ones who are already resilient and take that on. So that would be my take. I think it applies to individuals as well. It's the same story. For sure, all of us are going to think of consumption very differently. How much do we really need? Do we really need that much, whatever it might be? And therefore, responsible consumption will again get an uptake, and all of us will be thinking about it. And in the same way, we have to then think of responsible leadership. What does responsible leadership mean? It meant something else yesterday. And in the post-pandemic world, I think it's going to mean a lot more. It's going to mean much more about looking after those around us, being highly sensitive, having a level of empathy which is much higher. I think I've seen people go through three phases, right? So at the beginning of the crisis of any kind, everybody's a Superman or woman. Everyone says, I got this, I'm going to be able to be on top of the game. I think then comes a second phase when the reality dawns a little bit. And then there's a third phase where you begin to really understand and appreciate what's going on. And then you begin to feel the real action or the real change. And so recognizing that third phase and then letting it settle so that you're on top of the game as and when things come to normal is really important, rather than a pretense of being Superman or Superwoman, and I say pretense in the sense that it happens with everyone. We all want, as human beings after all, so we want to show up as Superman and Superwoman, but that's not the reality.
Yeah, so Shailesh is commenting, now is a good time to focus efforts on reskilling the teams to prepare them for the changes we will experience post-crisis, because even that landscape, I think, is going to be very different than what we may have imagined. But I particularly like your comment about everybody's pretending to be that they are Superman. I mean, the number of conversations I'm seeing about everybody being an expert about leading in crisis, I'm like, wow, I didn't know we had so many experts going around. But somewhere we need to have the humility to acknowledge that none of us have the answer, and we will have to kind of, it's a daily process of calibration and recalibration. And to the point you made earlier about learning not just from our mistakes, but mistakes of the others, which can shorten the learning curve so much. So Rahul, thank you so much. I really appreciate the time for that you have, come on the show in the middle of everything that's going on. And please do keep writing those blogs, because
I have to do that. I have to get more like this. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Tanvi.
All right, take care. Bye.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right, so that was a fantastic conversation. I hope you got some insights. I am particularly excited because tomorrow is the last day of this 5-day sprint that we had begun on Monday. I don't know where time has gone. We have had some great response. And so let me give you a sneak peek on the guest that we are having tomorrow. He is somebody who is going to be tuning in from Canada. And I am looking forward to all of us having a very different type of conversation to kind of sum up this series. Our guest tomorrow is actually Peter Katz. He is an award-winning speaker, songwriter, musician. I'm just going to play a little clip of his music for you so that you get enthused to join us tomorrow, because he will actually be sharing some backstage insights of his creativity and handling uncertainty, and his voice is just beautiful. So let me play you a quick little snippet. I could feel an ocean with all that I do. I was safer in the insides of those walls. That's not all there is. I know everything falls apart. Just wasn't ready for light to hit that hard and like the night. Space between the start and the end. Oh, the mirror that is now and then. Oh, the insides that are shown through my skin. So I hope you will join us tomorrow. It's going to be a very different conversation, and I'm sure you will fall in love with Peter and his voice and his music career, which has had very interesting things that we can learn and apply even in the corporate world. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and I'll see you tomorrow for the final day of the sprint of the crisis is the curriculum. I'll see you then.